Delaware Tech, Chemistry 100, Chemistry 110, Old Latin Names for Metal Cations. Nowadays, for writing the nomenclature of ionic compounds, especially for the names of cations, we typically use the metal's name followed by a Roman numeral if there's more than one possible charge. Well, previously, we used to name them in a different way. We used to name them based on the Latin words for those ancient metals. So if we have a metal that has two common ions, and many metals have two common ions, iron comes in +2 and +3 typically, though it is found in others rarely. Lead comes in +2 and +4. But the way these were named was you would take the Latin root for that name element, and then you'd add OUS or IC to the end of it to represent the ion. You'd use OUS for the lower charge version of that ion, and the IC suffix for the higher charge version. So what that looks like is this. Here are 4 metals from the ancient world. These were known for at least 2,000 years, and they have ancient Latin names that were used. Copper was cuprum, iron was ferrum, tin was stannum, lead was plumbum. That's where we get the word plumbing from, because lead pipes were the main type of pipes used by the ancient Romans. So they called lead plumbum, and that's where we get the word plumbing from. So you have these roots that derive from the ancient Latin names, CUPR for copper, FERR for iron, coming from ferrum, and then you add OUS or IC, depending on whether you're looking at the lower cation or the higher charged cation. So copper +1 and copper +2 are cuprous and cupric ions. Iron +2 and iron +3 are ferrous and ferric ions. Tin +2 and tin +4 are stannous and stannic ions, and lead +2 and +4 are plumbous and plumbic ions. So note that the us and ic ending don't tell you what the actual charge is. They just tell you it's the lower of the two. So be aware of that. There are 2 others that were used very commonly up until very recently. And in fact, you still find them on old bottles of chemicals or even new bottles of chemicals using the old nomenclature. Mercury, instead of using the ancient Latin name, which is a bit hard to pronounce, they would use mercurus and mercuric for mercury +1 and mercury +2, or mercury 1 and mercury 2. And gold +1 and +3 were called aurous and auric ions. And this translated in terms of naming ionic compounds is this. If you have FeCl3, we would now name this as iron 3 chloride, because the iron ion is iron 3 and the chlorine is a chloride ion, and you just put the 2 words together. Well, previously, and still today by many users, the iron 3 ion was called ferric ion, so that compound, FeCl3, would be called ferric chloride. And you still see this very commonly on bottles. Pb3 parentheses PO4 close parentheses 2. In other words, lead, there are 3 lead atoms and 2 phosphate ions in this. We would call this nowadays lead 2 phosphate because it's the +2 version of lead, which is the lower of the 2 commonly found versions of lead cations. So this would be called plumbous phosphate. And that's it for this section.